Greetings all, Ferrari 601 here. We're going to build a model. What is this model? Well, obviously, as it would say in the upper left corner of the box, it is RMS Titanic in 1700. This particular kit is by Academy. It is the centenary anniversary edition of this 1700 scale kit, which means that this kit was launched in 2012 or thereabouts, because that would have been 100 years from the launch and sinking of Titanic in 1912. Academy, they bring us this kit. This is part of the MCP line. MCP means multicolor parts, as you can probably see right there in the upper right. You can also see that this kit goes for $40 retail. MCP means multicolored parts. It means that, in theory, painting is not required on this model. However, you will see why you're going to want to be painting this one. This is a foray back into model making for me. Those of you who have followed the channel for a long time know that I am an avid die-cast model collector, but in terms of actually making things, I haven't done much in a very long time. However, I say that with a big caveat. This is not my first time building this particular kit because, well, through the magic of buying 3 of them, we'll show you what's going on. When all is said and done at the end of the day, this is what you end up with if you simply use what's in the box and nothing more. Again, it is Titanic, it is in 1700, and it is a fair enough representation of the ship. But these are just the raw colors that you get from the parts in the kit. There has been no paint applied anywhere. I've done minimal decal work. You can see I've got the name of the ship here on the bow here on port and starboard sides, and the only other decals that I used, there were more in the kit, but I only used the one there that says Titanic Liverpool. Those are actually 2 separate decals. Everything else, though, these are just the raw colors that you get from the plastic parts off of the sprues, and that's that. It's fair, it doesn't look too bad, but it looks rather muted, and obviously there are many details that could be augmented should you choose to use some paint. Like all of the grading here in the decks and whatnot, it's just done in deck color. And in this area, you can see where I've actually overlooked a few of these benches. But hatch covers and things like that, they just don't particularly stand out very well, just because they are all the color of the deck that is surrounding them. The capstans, they would not have been pure black. The vents would not have been entirely white in many cases. The platforms that the vents sat on certainly would not have been deck colored. The tops of the deck houses, for the most part, were not deck colored. So there are quite a few things that can be improved here just by adding a little bit of paint. However, good points on the model. The hull detailing is very nice. Some people say that the scaling of some of the windows and portholes, not necessarily the best. I can see where they're coming from in some respects. However, I do like the riveting and hull plate detail here on the side of the ship. So that's pretty good. So for 1/700 scale, and again, I built this one in one sitting over one day, about 6 hours total. Not bad considering what it is and considering that there's no paint at all. However, about 9 months later, and to date of recording this about 1 month ago, this was my second attempt again at this same 1/700 scale Academy kit. This one looks dramatically different from the other because I decided to paint this one and use all of the decals in the kit. So I have got the name of the ship and all of that, but I have tried my best to paint the shear line, which is across the top there of the black section of the hull just below the superstructure. And I have painted absolutely everything on the ship. So all the way up here on the forecastle, I have painted the capstans, wildcats, and anchor chain. I have painted the hatch covers, some of the vents as well. Obviously the tops of the deck houses, canvas covers on the lifeboats, tops of a lot of the superstructure windows there in terms of where the grand staircase was, and things of that nature. And I've tried my best to make sure that the locations and directions of the vents and things are at least consistent. Some of them were movable and some of them were not movable. I painted the decks as well. Got all of the benches in place this time. And obviously I've got more detailing here on some of the deck machinery aft as well as the docking bridge there. So paint makes this kit look a lot better in my opinion. I also painted the funnels, as you can see, my interpretation of White Star Buff. I should say that none of the colors that you see here are recommended in the kit. I just chose these just eyeballing it, knowing what generally the ship should have looked like. And I think I did okay. Some things are not correct in terms of placement of things. Like you'll see the cranes, the pivot point is too high on those cranes, which means that they're wrong. And of course, this was something that I did across all of the cranes. So they are all sitting too high on the vertical member of the cranes in every occurrence. The boom should be down low against the base. So things like that need to be corrected. The orientation of the forecastle crane needs to be changed, and I broke it coming off of the sprue, so that's got to be looked at again. And basically, I'm looking to emulate what I've done on this one, but to do it a little bit more cleanly, and just basically to make things have a little bit nicer of a display presence. So in synthesis, between the two attempts I've made at this kit so far, what I would like to do is maintain generally the fitment and orientations of a lot of the things on version 1.0 that's not been painted, but you'll see that I've got the cranes, they're at least sitting at the right height in terms of where the booms are in relation to the vertical parts on the crane there. The actual orientations of the cranes is not necessarily correct in terms of the heading that they're facing, but I've at least got the booms in the right spot. But obviously don't have any paint on this one. This one, I like what I did with the painting, but the orientations of some of the deck hardware are not that great. Plus, I broke a few rather conspicuous parts, such as the forecastle crane there. Obviously, this is in the correct orientation on this one, so this is going to be revised. And I also broke the foremast coming off of the sprue, which is why I mounted the flags a little bit lower than perhaps they should be, just to cover up the fact that this is broken. So quite a few things between them that they both have good and bad points. So this third attempt is just going to be synthesizing both of them, trying to take the best parts from both, applying what I learned in both, and all in all, just trying to make sure that we don't screw this up again. However, before we get into this, let's just take a closer look at the box here. Obviously, this is the top of the box. You can see we have a little window in here where you can see some of the parts, and you can also see that they have partially assembled the hull. You'll be taking that apart though, so don't get too excited. This comes apart and you'll see why. Beyond that, on the side of the box we have, there we go. It's basically the same art as on the cover, but RMS Titanic centenary anniversary. High quality multicolored injection from new tooling for easy assembly and painting. Display stand included, that's cool. On the back, it is just the bare cardboard top panel. More pictures there. Can be built as shown, maybe painted for enhanced detail. We will be doing that. Paint index, these are the recommended colors. So you can see what they're talking about there. I am using testers. However, I'm not really using any of the color recommendations. This is a skill level 3 model, by the way. And then your disclaimers in yes numbers of languages. Cool. Side panel again. There you go. And some specs on the ship in terms of the model. Length is 382 millimeters and height is 114 millimeters. And they're measuring from the tops of the masts. Top panel we saw, bottom panel, we have got several pictures of the completed model with some paint applied. So again, they're not even showing you what this thing looks like just in its raw, unmodified state out of the box. So they kind of do want you to paint this even though they tell you you don't really have to. So we will take their advice and we will be painting this one. I'm going to be using the same colors that I used in my second attempt of this model. So in all, it will be looking very similar, but obviously I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to learn a few things here and we'll do a better job in assembly. Otherwise, throughout the rest of the box, you have got sprues galore. So we have got this one, which is our benches, some other deck fittings, and of course the funnels, at least the bodies of the funnels, and we have got ourselves some gold props. I don't know if I'm going to be using those or if I'm going to be painting the other set of props in this kit. We have got these two sprues in this bag. You can see we have got props right there. I may be using these and painting them. We'll see. Funnel caps. And then we have got some parts of the funnel caps, the grating on top, mast ladders, some capstans, and let's see, there are the skegs for the wing props and our display stand. In addition, we've got our decks. They're upside down. Well, this one's upside down and these are right side up. So we have our fore and aft decks. So these will actually be the first things that I work on in terms of painting them and then fitting them out. And then we have got this sprue underneath, which is mostly superstructure fittings as well as some deck fittings for underneath in the lower superstructure. Railings and things for the fore and aft decks. There is your ventilation cap there. It goes just aft of midships in the engineer's space. And then we have got numerous vents, some more windows. There is the front plate on the bow, collapsible lifeboats, and more vents. There's the problematic crane right there, docking bridge hardware, compass in 2 halves, and of course we have our anchors and our lifeboats, which we didn't have enough of, and then more deck window fittings for the superstructure. That's it. So you've got 3 packages of sprues. So you got the smaller one and then the 2 larger ones, decal sheet, and then all of this in Korean. There you go, more warnings. And the instruction book, which I probably won't need at this point because I have all of this very fresh in my mind, but it's here anyway for reference. Well, returning, it has been quite a while since the last cut was taken. Matter of fact, about 12 hours or so. I have not been working on this for 12 hours straight. I have done other productive things today. However, we are nearing the home stretch. I still have our external decks here, the forward and aft decks on the sprues, but they are mostly put together at this point, save for the masts. And on the aft deck, obviously the upper superstructure is going to go over this. So we do have a little bit more work to do there, but the forward external deck, forecastle, well deck, and then getting into the B deck area, getting into the promenade, that's all together now. We've got all the vents and capstans and wildcats and chains and everything's been painted. The auxiliary anchor has been painted. And beyond that, we have got the boat deck all put together, save for the funnel caps. But we have got the lifeboats in there. We have got all of the vents, all of the other piping work that goes in. We have painted the tops of all the deck houses. We've got the decking over the officers' quarters all painted as well as the pad that the first funnel sits on. Got the collapsible boats with their covers painted, all the main lifeboats with their covers painted, the stairwell entrances painted, the bridge inside there. We've got the bridge that is now painted. That's cool. So we're in pretty good shape here. In addition to all of this, we bring you to where we have our hull segments. We've got the lower hull. These have been spray painted, but I've got the lower hull spray painted, and then I've got the upper hull spray painted as well. And I have also hand done the shear line here in yellow. It requires a little bit more adjustment. I have some touch-up paint that will help in that pursuit. But so far, that's all together. And we're just basically waiting on the shear line to cure enough to where we can manipulate it, because the next step for the hull is going to be to assemble the lower and upper halves, as well as to install the wing prop skegs and all 3 props themselves, which I have also painted. So I'm going to use the black ones, not the glossy ones, but I've painted them so that they basically look like the glossy ones in the kit. The funnel caps are here. I've got the grates installed in them, and we're just waiting for them to cure a little bit more before we put the funnel caps on. and then that'll basically do our work there on the superstructure. And then we'll start to put the ship together. So a little bit more to do here on the forward deck with the mast. We'll do the mast on the promenade deck, which is underneath here. So there we are. All that's together, all the cranes are together and in the proper orientation this time. This one's sitting a little bit higher than this one, but oh well, beggars can't be choosers. That's not too bad. All the benches are in, mast goes here, the main mast, and then all of our enclosed spaces here on A deck are done. So there's where we are at the moment. Right, so we have started our work on the upper hull, and as you can see, we have tried to clean up the shear line a bit, and we have installed our forward and aft railings, which look significantly different on the box, if you remember what the box looks like, because they apparently either did some dry brushing or they cheated a bit and used different parts than what come in the kit. But regardless, that's what comes in the kit, and I'm not really going to do anything else to them, and that's just the interior of the hull. All of this does start to become a bit more rigid as you assemble the ship, but for the moment, this is what the hull looks like, and that's where we are. The next step is going to be to start building this thing. And at this point, we have got our forward and aft decks now installed in the upper hull, so we now have deck space. Obviously, the B deck and A deck, and actually, yeah, C deck as well. There's some C deck in here. Superstructure is going to go on top of all of this stuff. And it's going to secure via these peg holes right there, via these pegs. Cool. So all of that's there. All this stuff in terms of building enclosed spaces is going to be covered up. But when you look down from forward or aft, you'll see all of that in there, and the lighting will filter through that nicely. So that's going to be cool. So yeah, we are starting to come together now. Right, so we have got our stack here in terms of the superstructure, C deck, B deck, and A deck. We have our aft deck, which is now more or less secured to the bottom of A deck. This is a little finicky, actually, because for whatever reason, this aft deck plate wants to bend down just naturally. You've got to pull up on it until the glue starts to cure between the bottom of A deck and the deck houses there down on what is now B deck. So that's something that you got to keep in mind. Otherwise, you're going to have a big old gap there. It's going to look bad. So pull up. What I did is I pulled up here on the starboard side crane, and I just kept tension on that until the glue started to cure a little bit. As you can see, it kind of is. So there's going to be a little bit of a gap there, but it's been greatly reduced, and I'm quite pleased about that. Otherwise, the forward deck is in much better shape. That fits much more nicely. And we are ready to top off A deck with the boat deck, which is right there. And then it's going to be, I think we're going to put the lower hull on, or should we put the lower hull on first so that we can actually flip this thing upside down if we have to? I don't know. We'll figure this out. Actually, what we're really going to do first is we're going to mount our wing props to the skegs, and then we're going to mount the skegs to the lower hull, which is right there, as well as the center prop to the lower hull directly. So that's next. Why complicate things by trying to put the skegs onto a completed hull? Let's not. Right, so we got the center prop on the lower hull, and then we've got our skegs with the wing props in there. Getting there, you get the idea. So they're curing, and then we'll put the skegs and the wing props together on the lower hull, and they're going to go here on each side. And hopefully they will not give me too much trouble. So we have got all three props mounted. That's cool. And then skegs look good. The paint did not adhere all that well to the skegs, not nearly as well as it did to the hull itself. Same thing happened on the other one that I built, but it will cure in a way that is stable at least, and you know, at least the colors do match. So It's not that bad. So next, I think we're gonna join the hull segments together. And there we are, the hull segments are joined. Effectively, she now looks as she did on May 31st, 1911, when she was launched. Really cool. So we now have a proper hull form, and she can stand on her own, and yeah, now we're just gonna fit the masts as well as the boat deck, and then we are very, very rapidly nearing completion on this. All right, so at this point, the ship is fundamentally complete. We have got the masts up and the ladders up, both sides. The masts did not break this time, so that's good. Waiting on the anchors. So we have not fitted the anchors yet, nor have we done the decals. However, everything else is done. It's fitted and it looks good. Little piece of fuzz, yes. So yeah, I think we can declare the ship fundamentally complete. Little bit more finishing details required. However, we are looking real good. And there we are, anchors fitted. Here is where I call it a night here, because it is about 10:30. And we started, actually we opened the box at about 5 a.m. But yeah, I did not work on this constantly from that time. But it's time to call it a night. We will let things cure overnight. And in the morning we will do decals. And then we're done. So yeah, basically complete, but for decals for the nameplates and the flags. But there it is. 1700 Titanic by Academy. Number 3 for me. And I am quite pleased with how this has shaped up. This is good. I do like how this one is turning out. Cool. Very nice. Good morning. It is 7:44, and we are all set to start decals, namely these. So the ones that we're going to use are the ones with the gold typeface. So we have, for the stern, we have Titanic, Liverpool, and then on port and starboard bow, we have Titanic, nameplate on both sides, which go between these two mooring eyelets. Cool. So the chain locker down here, windlass room is on this level. So that's where we are, and that'll be nice. Additionally, we'll do flags. So we've got US flag, which has 50 stars on it, which would not be correct for this time. We have the Union Jack, and then we have the house pennant for the white star. The Union Jack is going to go here on the fantail, which is not necessarily correct. Titanic would have flown a Royal Navy Reserve ensign off of there. However, they've got the Union Jack, so that's what we're going to be using. But yeah, home stretch here. Right, so nameplates applied on port and starboard bow. Obviously starboard bow here. So that is nice. And then we have got port bow. Nicely done. Doesn't show up quite as nice against the gold cheat line there, the shear line, but it's there. Probably should not have painted behind where the decal is going to go, but oh well, too late to do anything about it at this point. So that is just what it is. Next we'll be doing the nameplate across the stern, as well as port of registry, Liverpool. That's the most difficult one really, because it's got a fairly complex curve. And there we are. Decals are in place all around. There we go. We got the house pennant for the white star, and then the Union Jack, the not necessarily correct Union Jack, but there it is. Flag decals are really annoying because obviously they're just one continuous strip that you fold over on itself, and when it folds over on itself, that's it. So you're never going to get them totally straight. I would much prefer actual fabric that you could, if you had an actual piece of fabric that you could then sling over either the pole or the mast, that would work better. Probably would last longer as well, but it is what it is. That's what was in the kit, so that's what we used. But that is officially done. Completely done. No more to do on it. 1700 Titanic complete. And all in all, we started this process at like 5 a.m. yesterday. It is 8:18 a.m. So that is 24 hours plus 3. So, okay, not bad. And that is not with doing constant work on it, but yeah. Could it be better? Yeah, could absolutely be better. Could I be better at painting that shear line? Yeah, absolutely. However, masking and things is not something that I'm really familiar with doing, so I would rather do it freehand and then clean it up as best I can later. So that's what I've decided to do, and that's where we are. But yes, 1700 Academy Titanic complete and looking as good as it can. Very, very nice. And here we are with all 3 iterations side by side. Obviously, we got the newest one closest to us, and then they get progressively older as we move farther away, with the first attempt being the completely raw, unpainted kit, and then we move progressively forward. I think we have achieved ultimately what I set out to do at the beginning of this, was basically to have a synthesis between the first 2 attempts, in that we are painting this one, but the fitment in the first iteration was better, I think, in particular because I didn't break a couple of very conspicuous parts, such as the forecastle crane, as well as the mast up there. So we've got better fitment. I was more careful taking things off of the sprues, and we didn't break any parts this time, which was very good. And we have carried over most of the same painting. I have done a little bit more painting. I've changed a couple of colors here and there. But for the most part, we did what we did last time. Added a little bit more paint onto the vents around the compass platform. And I also changed the colors of the vertical wall separating the well decks. So you can see I have got the same tan color, what my interpretation of White Star Buff is. I've got that same color over in like this section, for example. All the vertical walls here on the exterior decks, I've done that color so that you'll see that there's a contrast. On this model, I did that just in white. So there you go. I believe that those walls would have been more of a tan color anyway. So perhaps a little bit more accuracy in that regard, but yeah, very nice. Very pleased with how it's turned out. Obviously, both of them have somewhat janky cheat lines in terms of the shear lines on them, because they were both done freehand, and they were all done with exactly the same paints. So they will be exact matches. But yeah, cool. That's what we've got there. And then, of course, they are all the same kit in the same scale, so they are dimensionally identical as well. But there it is, 1700 Titanic by Academy. And now just for some final thoughts. Thoughts about the kit, thoughts about the building experience. Having done this 3 times now, I'm definitely very familiar with how they've got this kit set up, and I think it is generally very well sorted. The instructions, although I really didn't use them for this time around, they are clear, they are pretty concise, they're not throwing extraneous information at you. The diagrams are pretty good, they are clear enough. There are a couple of things, particularly with parts that are either duplicated or very nearly duplicated. For example, a lot of the benches and a lot of the vents. They are not necessarily all the same, so they are location specific. So make sure, particularly on Sprue D, make sure that you are looking at the instructions, that you know which vents go where. And similarly with the benches, you have double benches that are on the stern deck, on the poop deck, but they're nowhere else. So don't mix them up, don't confuse them, because if you try to put a double bench in a slot designed for a single, it's not going to fit, and now you've got plastic glue residue all over the place, and perhaps you've ruined something. So just be careful of that. Otherwise, the model goes together very nicely. Most of the time spent in this particular one was on the painting, as it was with the previous time that I built this. It just takes time. Obviously make sure that you have selected colors that make sense.
don't necessarily follow the recommendations because you might not necessarily be able to find those specific colors, but find colors that make sense. Obviously, if you're familiar with the Olympic class ships, you know generally what their liveries looked like, particularly in 1912 in terms of Titanic's time. The shear line was higher up than it was later on in Olympic's career, for example, so just make sure of that. Beyond that, just be sensible. Don't overpaint. Don't use too much paint. If you do screw up, you can always go back and correct it later with some corrective painting action. My recommendation is to paint things on the sprues as much as possible and only paint one color at a time. Like when it was time to paint the decks, I just painted all of the decks first, and then all of the detail comes later after the deck paint has mostly dried. Also, that means if you get some paint on something while you're painting the decks that you didn't mean to get paint on, well, you're going to cover that up when you do your second detail run. So little things like that make sense. I used spray paint for the hull segments, the lower and upper segments. I definitely recommend doing that with a spray paint because there's great detailing molded into the hull that you don't want to cover up if you're a little bit too heavy-handed with the brush. So be that as it may, probably the most finicky part in the superstructure right here, the compass platform. That's annoying. The compass comes on the sprue in 2 halves. Other than that, though, just painting the tops of the deck houses in that gray color. For whatever reason, my gray color was very thick, so I ended up basically with a sort of mottled concrete-like texture in terms of how I applied it with the brush, which is not entirely inaccurate because it was a thin layer of concrete on top of a lot of those deck houses, particularly where vents were mounted to on the deck. So that is actually somewhat fortuitous, I would say. Other than that, though, cranes, make sure that you have the booms attached to the lower part of the vertical member of the cranes rather than the upper one. They will fit over the upper section there, the bulb section. Just make sure you don't give into that temptation. And then other than that, just be careful with the sprues and taking parts off of them. I used a razor blade, utility knife, whatever you want to call it, taking the sprues apart, taking the parts off, and it worked very well. X-Acto knives, other utility knives, crafting knives, definitely important. But whatever it is that you want to use, make sure that it is good and sharp, otherwise you're going to have a bad time. Beyond that, I like the accent colors. It's a very reflective gold color that I use to emulate a lot of the deck machinery, as well as some other areas of detail, the whistles on the funnels, for example, things like that. And then, yeah, there it is as well on the tops of the capstans and the docking bridge control set. So I do like that color. I liked integrating the White Star buff color into the vertical walls that run latitudinally across the width of the ship on the external decks, so I like that as well. And then painting the propellers in that gold color as well, rather than using the glossy ones straight off the sprue. I think this looks a little bit nicer. Good join up on the hull, no problems with that. The rudder is straight. And then as you pull away, the ship has a very nice presence, and some of the more granular details, the imperfections, they start to fade away the farther out you get, and it just looks a whole lot nicer. Here we go. Comparison shot, all 3. The oldest is on top and the newest is on the bottom, and you can plainly see how things have improved throughout all of this process. But I do have to say, I'd recommend this 1/700 scale Academy kit. It is a skill level 3. It took me basically 26 hours to do it from start to finish, but that's not with working on it straight. So in terms of assembly time, probably 6 to 8 hours, including the painting, not counting the paint drying time. But be that as it may, I do thank you all very, very much for watching this change of pace from me, Ferrari Man 601, saying thank you very much, and of course, we will see you soon.